All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm Rob Ciampa. So, those of you who have visited my house, you've experienced cocktails. We tend to do a lot of experimenting with various cocktails, various bases, but one of the most important cocktails in our house is the Negroni. And today we're going to talk about the Negroni, but the reason we're doing the class tonight is that, with the current quarantine, a lot of you folks are actually imbibing more than you used to. And I'm getting a whole lot of calls basically saying, hey, you know what? What cocktail should I make? What rye should I buy? What gin should I use? Blah, 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 blah. So I said, all right, you know what? I'm getting enough of these. We may as well turn around and have a class. So I'm not a bartender. I'll explain my history with spirits, but obviously I play one on Facebook now, which makes it rather interesting. So I want to share that and go through it, but we're not just going to say, hey, let's go make a Negroni. We're going to talk about all the pieces. So I'm going to give a little bit of an intro into into why I'm doing this. We're going to talk about botanicals. We're going to talk about the base ingredients of the classic Negroni, Campari, vermouth, and gin. We'll go with the history of the Negroni itself, and then I'm going to look at several riffs on it. And along the way, we'll teach you some of the techniques. So, as a background, for many, many years when I was growing up, I had the opportunity to work in a restaurant in Boston. And I, like a lot of people who go into the restaurant business, I knew nothing. And I became first the stock boy for wine and spirits, and I became the buyer for wine and spirits. And I got to know, the spirits pretty well. But over the years, I never really got into it. I was more of a wine guy. And I think the reason is that I end up having a lot of really crappy cocktails. You go into a place and I have a cocktail. My first martini was like horrific. It was just like all alcohol. The bartenders weren't using jiggers, and if they were just like slinging stuff and going crazy. And I just never fell in love with it. So about 10 years ago, I felt I was missing something, because a lot of wine people, our whole shtick is, hey, we should have great taste. We are comparing things. And so what's happening is we should be experimenting. We should be tasting things. And I wasn't getting there. So I decided to take some classes. So about a little over a decade ago, I decided to get trained by some of the best bartenders in Boston, Jackson Cannon, Bobby McCoy. And it opened up my entire world. And so for over 10 years, I've been experimenting, and it's been rather interesting. So that was sort of my journey in here. And I think for a lot of folks are really intimidated by, geez, what do I do to make a cocktail? The reality is it's actually pretty easy. And like everything else in life, you've just got to do a lot of experimenting. So, as you go through this, there's no right or wrong way to do it, except when we start getting into shaken versus stirred. Okay, there are certain things that are religion, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But to start, I want to grab some stuff over here. And it's impossible to have a discussion. This is going to be difficult for you folks to say. It's going to be difficult to have a discussion on cocktails or on certain types of spirits without talking about the ingredients. So we're going to be talking about a couple things. These are juniper berries. You can get these at the grocery store. They're small and they're tiny. It's the foundation for gin and even some of the other spirits that we'll be talking about. Things like rose petal, orange peel, lemon peel, dandelion root. We have calendula. We have chamomile, and there's so many different botanicals. So every spirit we're going to be talking about today, and every element of Negroni is going to have a basis in botanicals. So why do we care about this? It's the botanicals that impart a very, very different flavor to gin, to vermouth, and even though we're using one bitter, which is going to be the Campari, it's sweet bitter, the reality is it also has a botanical profile. So that's going to be important to what we're doing here. So let's get into Campari. So I think a lot of you ended up, Campari dates to 1860. It was invented by Gaspare Campari, in a town called Novara, Italy. So Novara actually sits between Milan and Turin in northern Italy. And those two cities are going to be fairly important in the history of the Negroni. So invented in 1860. Now, for those of you who've seen it, it's a red thing. It's not grenadine. You may have seen some of the other ones. That it's not Campari, but also Italian bitter liqueurs, Aperol, which is terrific. It's also owned by the Campari company these days. And we also have some alternatives like Cappelletti. The reason I'm showing you this, it's also worth, and when we wrap up the class, mix things up, because you'll see a couple of recipes that'll make all the difference in the world. Hey, Zach, could you bring the screen down just a little bit so I can see the table? All right, so what ended up, so that's going to be the first element. That's going to be Campari. So the first element of the Negroni is going to be Campari. Thank you, Zach. I've got my helper here. Make sure you can see the table. The second element is going to be gin. Okay, and with gin itself, I'd go up a little bit higher.
Yeah, whatever you want.
We're winging this. This is Facebook, guys, so it's a free class. So we're gonna be a little kludgy.
Again, he can't see your comments, but we're keeping track of them.
Okay, beautiful. We love it. All right, the second element is going to be gin, and we're going to be working with several types of gin. So I've got, you've heard of London Dries, etc. So I got a couple gins that are interesting, and gins are all over the map. All of them have a flavor profile. In my note that I sent out, I said, a lot of people are into Bombay Sapphire, a great gin, but not great for a Negroni. My friend Joel, who's on the call, sent me a note today giving me some grief because he likes Sapphire, gin in his Negroni. That's fine, whatever you like, but generally the profile's a little bit different. All right, so a good base gin is going to be a Beefeater. It's a London dry gin. We talked about those juniper berries, one of the main ingredients in that. So all a gin is, it's a neutral spirit, and it's infused and there's a redistillation process to get the flavors into the gin. So usually with a London dry, like a Beefeater, it's going to be a 24-hour.
Joel Brown is asking to get a better look at the botanicals later on.
Okay, Joel. Okay, we'll give Joel a better look at the botanicals later on. We've got some questions coming in. So oftentimes with, say, a London dry, whether it's Tanqueray or a Beefeater, it's usually a 24-hour redistillation of a slew of botanicals. Okay, so that's going to be the key with a London dry. And you also have some other more boutique London dries like Sipsmith, which I also love. You can use either of these, and oftentimes the base Negroni calls for it. But today, I like the Plymouth. In a Plymouth gin, compared to, so what's the difference between that and a London dry? With a Plymouth gin, what you're going to have is a 90-minute redistillation. So the flavor profile is not going to be as pronounced. It's all there. It's got the infusions. But my personal preference is in a Negroni, there's enough crazy stuff going on with the Campari and the vermouth that the gin can take a less of a forward role. So I tend to like it that way. So we're going to be doing our first one, with a Plymouth gin. So there's a lot of gins in the marketplace. Some have really funky flavor profiles. When it comes to Negroni, don't get too creative. The London dries or the Plymouth usually does the trick. Now, the next piece we're going to talk about is going to be vermouth. And vermouth, I would say that most people don't know what vermouth is. And a couple of years ago, it was during a travel through Spain, I had some vermouths that were they were to die for. You can drink them on the rocks. They were fabulous. And I thought about all the lousy vermouths I had, in the States. You taste it, it's like, this is disgusting. The reason it's disgusting is because, one, we don't know what it is, and we don't know how to take care of it. So I'm going to bring some vermouths over here. So there are lots of options on vermouth, and I'll explain what vermouth is in just a moment. So a vermouth is actually a wine base. So what people end up doing is they're going to take a base of wine, they're going to take a neutral spirit, and what I usually do is I'll use usually a Trebbiano, Italian wine. I'll remove about I would say 3/4 of it, I'll put it aside. And then what I'll do is I'll get neutral alcohol, usually like a brandy, and I'll infuse about 18 botanicals in the brandy and let it steep. And then what I'll do is I'll clear that out and I'll mix the botanicals. Yeah, I'll get rid of the botanicals, but the remaining liquid, I'll put back in the bottle and mix it with the wine. So all vermouth is basically, it's a base wine, it's a ton of botanicals, and it's going to be a neutral spirit, but not so much of a spirit that's going to be too powerful to drink. So the problem with vermouth is people end up buying a bottle of vermouth and they'll open it up, have it with something because they get a party and they'll be making a martini or something like that, and they'll let it sit for a year. Vermouth has a shelf life. Usually shelf life, people say between 1 and 3 months. We found that it's about 3 months. So what I end up doing is when I open a vermouth, I'll use a marker, I'll put a date on it, and vermouth goes in the fridge. After 3 months, chuck it. Okay, and this is why you can get small half bottles and things like that. And I'll talk about vermouth quality in a minute. And by the way, people have been infusing botanicals into wine for thousands of years, but the evolution of vermouth really occurred from about the 18th century onward, and the whole major area of vermouth was actually Torino, Italy, up in Piedmont. So what happened there is one of the older ones is this is a Carpano. Okay, this is a half bottle. And for those of you just experimenting, you don't have to get the big bottles. You can get a half bottle and just put that in your fridge. So, this came out of Turin in 1786. And every vermouth has a distinct flavor profile. So think about what we're talking about. We're talking about gins with all distinct flavor profiles, vermouths with all different flavor profiles, and we've got Campari. This is what makes the Negroni a very, very interesting drink. So I love the Carpano. It's fabulous. Other brands are Cokie, and the one you see very often is actually the Martini and Rossi. And people say, well, it's inexpensive, it can't be good. It's an excellent vermouth. And so you can get something like this for about $6. So it's not that expensive. Again, it goes in the fridge. You can get it, in basically the 375 milliliter size, or you can go with the 750. And I'll talk about the types of vermouth in a second. So we're going to be working with red vermouth today. So people say, well, there's red sweet vermouth and there's white dry vermouth. Yeah, there is, but there's actually more. Okay, so the red sweet vermouth, it's going to be infused slightly differently. It may have a different base of wine, but it's what basically brings the Negroni together. It's going to be a red sweet vermouth. Now, other types of vermouth are going to be the dry white vermouth. Well, we'll use white vermouth and something else in a couple of minutes. Also great to have. This is Dolan out of France. So you'll find excellent vermouths out of Italy, of course. So we talked about Cokie, we talked about Martini and Rossi. You got Ciampa, you have de Maze, etc. So you've got some fantastic stuff there. In French, you've got Dolan, great brand. Also, in addition to sweet, white, dry, there is also, I'm starting to see this more in the States, and I saw more of it in Europe, is actually a Bianco. It's a white sweet vermouth. And I tend to favor this when I'm doing a white Negroni, which we'll do when we do the riff on the Negroni. So that's your mix. There's also, you're starting to find here in the States, this is Ransom. This is a terrific vermouth. I find with either the vermouths I make or the garage vermouths in the States, they're better on their own. I haven't found them really being great as a mixer, in a Negroni. So this is something to think about. But again, please respect your vermouth, date it, put it in the fridge, and chuck it after a few months. So hopefully that that all makes sense. So let's talk about the Negroni, and let's talk about the history of the Negroni. And as I mentioned earlier, two important cities in Italy is Milano in a region of Italy called Lombardia, and then there's going to be Torino, which is in Piemonte. So as we mentioned that when it comes to say Campari, which was invented between them, actually, in Piedmont. It was really Milan that brought a lot of the stuff to life. And so what happened is in Milan, what happened with Gaspare Campari, he ended up opening up, he ended up opening up a bar, and he started serving a drink not long after Campari called the Milano Torino, the Mito, which is the predecessor to all this. And what the Mito was, it was equal parts Campari and equal parts Punta Maiz, which is a red sweet vermouth or a derivative of a red sweet vermouth. And so they put them together and added an orange peel, and that was called the Mito. Okay, so that was the early one, 1860s into 1870s. And then along came the Americano. So somebody wanted to water it down a little bit, so they added soda water to the Mito to create the Americano. So the Americano, and you can still order an Americano today. I think if you walk into a bar and you say, I'd like a Mito, the bartender will look at you kind of awkward. It's like, what's that? And it may be too flavor forward. So what happened is the Americano kind of cut the botanicals a bit. Now, just a piece of trivia, those of you that are into Bond, so Ian Fleming, when he was writing about James Bond, and Casino Royale was a series, first drink was actually an Americano. So as much as we want to think about a martini, a shaken martini with Bond, it was actually an Americano. So if you end up on a game show when you're asked that, you'll win. So fast forward 1919, and there's a gentleman. His name was Camillo Negroni. Okay, so an actual person, although the lore around him, who knows? In 1919, he had left Italy, apparently, allegedly. He traveled through the States and acquired a taste for something a little bit stronger. So he went into Cafe Cassone in Firenze, and he basically ran into a bartender that he knew called Fosco Scaselli. And he's told Scaselli, he's like, look, I don't want the Americano with the soda water. I want it with gin. And so what they did, equal parts Campari, equal parts sweet vermouth, and then a London dry gin. In 1919, the birth of the Negroni. Now, about that time, here in the States, we were dealing with, prohibition, so, things really weren't happening, so it was more of a European element at the time. So that was the birth of the Negroni, all right? So we're gonna work our way toward making a Negroni, but, we wanna cover a couple of techniques first. I'm gonna move some of this stuff out of the way so we can, get all of our ingredients ready. So for the gear, today we're gonna be using a mixing glass. And we said earlier, don't make a Negroni. So when it comes to shakers, you get your French shakers, 2 parts. You got your cobbler shaker, 3 parts. You've got your Boston shaker you've all seen. Go together, open up. Now, why am I showing you this if we're not going to be shaking? Because go buy a Boston shaker and they can use the components as a mixing glass. So you don't have to go and buy a nice Japanese mixing glass, which my wife was kind enough to give me. You can use your regular, your regular Boston shaker yourselves. And also, you can mix a Negroni, in a glass. So I'm going to do it classic style stirred. So shaken versus stirred. When do you do which? It all depends. Oftentimes, if I want a spirit that's going to be very, very clear, okay, and I just want it cooled, and I'm not going to be using simple syrup or egg whites or something that has to be heavily infused, I'm going to stir it, okay? So with Negroni, that's going to be a clear drink. The whole process of stirring versus shaking, you're also breaking off these small when you're shaking things up. So what's going to occur is that it's going to be somewhat of a cloudy drink. And occasionally, okay, and I also like martinis, but that's out of our scope today. With a martini, I'll do it either shaken or I'll do it stirred. And the visual difference between them is striking. Okay, so even though you can strain things a certain way and double strain it to get some of the shards out, the reality it's going to be a stirred drink. So you want a mixing glass, get a decent one. It's not that expensive. You're going to want a bar spoon. Okay, usually long enough, and I'll talk about how we want to use that in just a minute. A bar spoon, and there are different lengths. And then you're going to need a strainer. You can use a julep strainer or a hot strainer. We're going to be stirring, and all it's going to do is to keep the ice back. And we'll talk about techniques in just a minute as to how you want to turn around and actually serve it. So we'll go through that shortly. So in addition, jiggers. Now I'm going to go on a limb here, and this may offend some people, but if I walk into a bar, there's a whole precise element to making a cocktail. All right, and if I walk into a bar and somebody's free pouring, I'm walking out. You know, maybe when I was 18 and had a fake ID and I wanted a buzz, that would be great. You know, but the reality is, I want a drink that tastes good. I want a drink that's going to be balanced. And anybody who's free, I don't care how good they are. Okay, you know, this is 1 ounce. This is 2. Okay, if you guys are into metric, this is about 30 mils. You just can't do that. So that's going to be important. Now, when it comes to serving, which we'll talk about in a minute, I tend to like my Negronis in what's called a rocks glass. Some people call it an old-fashioned glass, and I usually do it with a rock. And we'll show some of the stuff that we're going to do to create, you know, the right ice for this whole experience. Other options, some people like it up. So what they'll do is this will be a coupe glass. Okay, if you're doing drinks up, get them in the freezer for a half hour beforehand. So this is great. And there's also a really cool glass that a lot of people use. This is called the Negroni glass. So one of the things that you may want to do, you may not want a full Negroni. And you know, what my wife Laura and I do is oftentimes we're going to sit down. We don't want a full drink, or we're having folks over. We're going to be having wine. We'll just cut. You know, we'll make a full Negroni. We'll serve it over a couple of Negroni glasses. So you've got some options to deal with that. So the other thing to think about is ice cubes. All right, and we'll be serving this with a big block. And you say, okay, how do I do this? Because your typical, you know, my refrigerator ice, all little things, they don't look very good. You just buy a little container, fill it with water, and you make your big cubes that come out great. Now, a friend of mine, Stephen Millman, we have this ongoing over how to get actual ice cubes entirely clear. It's tough to do at home. A lot of bars now are buying specialized equipment to get ice cube clear. So that's way beyond the scope of what we want. You know, right now, focus, go and spend a couple of bucks on big. So we'll talk about that. So that's the gear. That's what we're doing. So now let's take a look at making a Negroni. So what we want to do is we want to start off with our mixing glass. You're right here. And the order that I tend to do, and I'm going to make a single serving, is I go with the specific order based on, you know, the thicker element first. And I tend to mix the liquids first and then add the ice. Some people add the ice and then do it. It doesn't matter. What I like to do is I start off with the Campari first. So I'm going to do 1 ounce. Of Campari. This is a classic Negroni. I'm going to switch to vermouth. I'm going to do 1 ounce of the Carpano, just a quick vermouth. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going for the Plymouth gin, but any London dry will work really well. And mix it up. Again, there's no rules. If you have different gins, and as you start expanding your bar, you're going to start buying gins. We get stuff very, we probably have about 20 different gins that we try with different cocktails. So we're going to add 1 ounce of Plymouth. So we've done 1 ounce of Campari, 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, and we've done 1 ounce of Plymouth gin. Okay, so now we're gonna hit the ice. Okay, so this is going to be not your fancy ice cubes, but your regular ice cubes. So with your bar spoon, there's a whole, in practice with a bar spoon, what you're going to do is for about 30 seconds, you're stirring it up. Now, just a note on technique, as with a bar spoon, you're actually going to want, I'm not sure you guys can see it, you want it on the edge of the glass. So you're not doing this, okay? All right, you're gently, you're letting it roll with your fingers. You're gonna do that for about 30 seconds or so. I'll leave it for just a minute. And then what I'll do is, depending on the type of Negroni making, you want an orange peel. This isn't just for beauty, and I'll talk about the role of the orange in just a moment. So what I'll end up doing, this type tends to work best. If you're at home, you can down, you don't do anything. If you want to trim down the edges, you can turn it around. But what's going to be important here is with the orange itself, you can actually express some of the oils into the glass, which I'll show you in a minute. So now that we have this ready, we're going to use this is a Hawthorne strainer.
Question
asking, coming in.
How do you know how much ice to put in?
How much ice to put in? Pretty much to cover the liquid mixture. Great question. So the question that came in is how much ice do we put in? Enough to cover the liquid. You don't have to do the ice. All right. So with the Hawthorne strainer, and what I'm going to do is going to take my rocks glass. I put in a big ice cube. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pour. Now, when you express, it's the skin side out. And what you want to do is you want to squeeze, and you'll get some of the oils actually in there. Then take it, run it across the rim, twist it, throw it in, and that, my friends, is a Negroni. God, that's delicious. Now, let's talk about drinking it. One of the things for those of us who worked in wine, there are very, very different sensory mechanisms for taste all over the mouth. And men and women actually taste differently too. My wife reminds me of that all the time. So don't chug it. In fact, just don't drink it either. For those of you who are tasting it live, okay, you made it, if you played along too, taste it and let it sit in your mouth. And you'll start all the various flavor profiles. You're going to get the mixture. And this is fascinating about Negroni. You've got the base. You got the base dry. You've got bitter with the Campari. You get the sweet with the vermouth. And as we mentioned, all three ingredients are ripe with botanicals. So as simple as this is, 1, 1, 1, 1 ounce, 1 ounce, 1 ounce of three ingredients. As simple as it is, it depends, as we said, on the type of vermouth, the type of gin, and Campari, and what goes in here. And on the nose, it's just, especially with the orange there, it brings out orange characters. When you look at, Campari itself, it's got something in it called, and they hide what they make Campari out of. But there's something, what they're public about is something called Chianti, which is a type of orange. And so I tend to use an orange peel in a Negroni. Absolutely fabulous. Great aperitif. So that's the Negroni. So let's do a couple of riffs. So I'll put that off to the side here. Let's talk about the white Negroni. And this is going to be another interesting play. So what I'm going to do is, can you turn on? I've got my helper here. Could you empty that out? I've got another. You know what? I'm going to use one of the. I don't need it. I'm going to use one of the other mixing.
All right.
So similar principle. So with the white Negroni, our base is going to be gin. For this particular cocktail, I'm going to do a London Dry. I'm going to do a sip, and we've got interesting alternatives. And remember, the whole key for those of us, it's like Mr. Potato Head of cocktails. You're swapping out this nose for that nose. So although the base of a white Negroni is going to be gin, we're substituting the Campari with something out of France called Suze, gentian-based bitter liqueur. So allegedly, the white Negroni originated in 2001. A guy by the name of Wayne Collins, who was asked to make a Negroni, and where he was, it may have been a bar in Paris. He didn't have the ingredients, so with no Campari, he decided to use Suze. All right, and what we don't have, and I'll grab it, is I actually went to the liquor store for Lillet. So he used Lillet instead of vermouth, and Lillet is from the Bordeaux region of France. It's somewhat like vermouth. So for this particular rendition, I'm going to go with the Martini and Rossi Bianco. So this is a sweet white vermouth instead. So similar to what we did before. I'm going to switch out my jiggers, and I'm going to start off actually with the Suze. We're going to do 1 ounce of Suze. If you have Lillet, basically Lillet with the white Lillet, not the red or the rosé Lillet, you're going to use that. But I'm using a Martini and Rossi sweet white vermouth. An ounce. Question?
Question from Jane asking how vermouth is different from Barolo Chinato.
Barolo Chinato.
Yeah, that's the one.
So different. His question was, how is vermouth different from Barolo Chinato? I love Barolo Chinato. Barolo Chinato has a different base. Obviously, it has a Barolo base. It's got a Nebbiolo base of wine, so it's a strong red base in a different set of infusion with botanicals. So it tends to be also ridiculously expensive if you can find somebody who's going to share with you. So finally, 1 ounce, London Dry on the sip spit side. All right, so similar again. 1, 1, 1. So those of you getting creative at home, switch it up. You know, there's no hard and fast rules. The question earlier, just enough to cover. I'm going to wipe the previous bar spoon. Similar technique. Second stir. Do not shake a Negroni. I think what set this whole thing off is everybody. I love Stanley Tucci. Something about bald Italian American men, but he shook his Negroni. Killed me. And so what we'll do is I'm going to use a coupe glass. 1 second on the question. And what I'll do is I will use the Jewel strainer. Usually this is going to be chilled. The color very, very different. So chill it, serve it up, that works too. And it's interesting, if you're having a party, by all means, serve some regular Negronis and serve some white Negronis and play it that way. So we're going to do a couple more riffs, and we'll take some questions. So I'm taking the glass part of a Boston Shaker. Question.
I have a couple questions about the addition of bitters in Negroni, specifically orange or less.
So when I thought about the class, I was going to put some bitters out, and bitters are amazing. They really augment a drink. I do not use bitters when it's going to be, Angostura, Peychaud's, orange bitters, or some other type of funky bitters. You're dealing with 3 base ingredients that are heavily infused with botanicals. All right, the addition of bitters, they play it well enough on their own. Certain things, certain drinks, and this is where a martini, occasionally with a martini, a gin martini, which is going to be a base gin and usually a dry white vermouth. I may do some orange bitters in that just to bring out a couple of flavors. But with a Negroni, I never add bitters. All right, so let's talk about a Boulevardier. And there's some controversy. It's like, well, a Boulevardier is a Negroni made with bourbon. Yeah, not really, because the whole thing is a Boulevardier dates to about the same time that Negroni was created. So it's really not clear whether a Boulevardier is really Negroni with bourbon, or they both originated at the same time, or the Boulevardier came first. So for those of you who like the elements, who enjoy a good bourbon, what Boulevardier is going to be, it's going to be a riff. I call it a riff on the classic. So what we're going to do for this one is we're going to start off with my where did I do my Campari? We're going to start off with Campari. And by the way, one of the things I failed to do for the white Negroni, I don't use orange peel in it. Okay, it's a free class. I screw up, right? I use lemon peel. So what we're going to do, for the Boulevardier, we're going to start off with 1 ounce of Campari. I'm going to go with a Martini and Rossi red sweet vermouth. And bourbon. So for those of you who enjoy bourbons out there, so right now we're dealing with 90 proof 4 roses, which is great. A lot of bourbons are coming out pretty much close to cask strength. Don't start getting into crazy proofs here. I mean, you want the drink balanced enough, and you don't want to have to dilute it. So usually something 100 or less is going to be fine. I'm using 4 roses, which is dynamite. All right, so 111 bourbon, red sweet vermouth, and Campari. Doesn't fit as well in this one. Bring off the bar spoon. Again, these are all stirred drinks. Now for this, I'm going to do a couple things. Well, that sits there. I tend to like Boulevardiers with lemon peel on that. So sometimes it sticks. There we go. This lemon is tougher, so I switch. There we go. And what I'm going to then do, bring off the strainer. So the fight that we have in my house is I like the classic rocks glass. My wife tends to like something with a bit more character and everything else, so we use one of her glasses. I'm going to use a big rock. Like the orange, express the lemon. And by the way, if you're into pyrotechnics, you've probably seen techniques at a bar where if you're expressing the oils are flammable. So if you're expressing lighter, you can put on a little bit of a shell. You can do the rim of the glass, twist her up, put it in there. Very, very different nose from the Negroni. Oh, that's good. Zach, you're going to be having some fun tonight.
I'm looking forward to it.
I can't. So those are the three risks, but I want to do one more. And again, I'm using both parts of my Boston shaker for stirring. So here's where I'm going to challenge all of you. You have the opportunity to go by the book and create a classic Negroni. But your other option, as I mentioned, is Mr. Potato Head. Swap some stuff out. So some time ago, I came home and my wife had purchased 4 bottles of rye. She loves rye, the taste sensations and everything else. And she said, we want to create something. So we started going through some old classic books on how to create, rye-based cocktails. We saw if there was a Negroni, and we tried a couple that were based on, I think one of them was the Old Pal. We were looking through some like Parisian books out of the 1920s. A lot of Americans left during Prohibition. They went to Paris and London, and they wrote cocktail books. So we did it with Campari and rye, but it wasn't doing it for us. And she had said, I want to do it with Aperol. So Aperol, it's not going to have the intensity of Campari, but Aperol gets rather interesting. It's going to wipe out the jigger. And so we're going to use Aperol. We're going to use a red sweet vermouth. And if you're a rye drinker, or if you're not a rye drinker, Rittenhouse rye is absolutely terrific, and it's maybe $14 a bottle. It's cheap. So it's these 3 elements going to go together. So we're going to start off with Aperol. And remember, you get a house. There's no hard fast rules. Do what you want. And I'll tell you the name of this drink in just a moment. So 1 ounce of Aperol. One ounce of red sweet vermouth. And 1 ounce of Rittenhouse rye. This is clocking at about 100. This is bottled and bond, so it's going to be about 100 proof. It's going to be exactly 100 proof. All right. So again, we're serving this clear, so this will also be stirred. So again, you don't have to go and buy a fancy mixing glass. You can if you want. But it's important, make sure that the base of that spoon whether it's going to be the tin part of the Boston Shaker or these, make sure it's on the side. You know what? You want to be gentle. You don't want to break up the ice. You want to get the liquid chill. Now, what I'm going to do for a moment, I tend to like, in this drink, so we couldn't find the drink that had this mixture. If you folks let us know. And the day that my wife sat down and we experimented to create this, she had been down in Cambridge, in Massachusetts, at a Bauhaus exhibit. And so when we created this, and with all the ryes, and we were Campari and Cappelletti and everything else, we found this one worked. And I looked and said, we're going to call it. She says, well, I was at the Bauhaus today, so we call it the Bauhaus. So this is our own, we're doing riffs. This is our own riff creation. This we've served for, I would say, a year, and it goes over fabulous. What I like to do is for this one, I think my peel is getting dull. I'm going to do orange again. So what we'll do is I'm going to do it differently. I usually have this chilled, but we're going to do a semi-serving. So this is going to be a Nick and Nora glass. For those of you in Massachusetts, there's a great, when the place, there's a place outside of Davis Square called the Boston Shaker. They have some great stuff. Or you can go online. There's places like Cocktail Kingdom that have it. So what we're going to do, assuming it's a chilled glass, I'm going to serve this up. I'm going to express, if I have a bourbon-based drink, I like lemon. If I have a rye-based drink or something gin, I'll tend to go with orange. I'll express that. Move it in. Twist it up. And that's the Bauhaus. That's delicious. So what we've covered, we've done a classic Negroni. We've done a white Negroni. We've done a Boulevardier. And we've done a Bauhaus. So my friends, I hope it took your mind off of the present situation that we're all in. As we said at the beginning, some of you are drinking a little bit more, which is fine. Just don't drink poorly. I mean, you've got 4 great options here. The liquor stores remain open, but my challenge to you is by all means experiment. These are, I mean, Negronis, it's as simple as it gets, and it's dynamite. And, what I find is, and I was talking to a bartender recently, and he says, when somebody comes in, and cocktail seriously. And I mentioned during one of the emails, there's a couple places that I like here in Boston. I'm a big fan of Troquet, so the team down at Troquet, they actually make a really great Negroni. You can say, well, Negroni's all the same. Once you get out there and you start drinking Negronis, no, they're not all the same. And let the bartender, by all means, let them. You turn around and choose. Like, you know what? Choose the vermouth for me. Okay, they're going to use Negroni. Choose the vermouth and choose the gin. Make it interesting. And in New York, there's the best Negroni bar, probably one of the best in the world, is going to be Dante. And Dante's fantastic. So they really say a lot of great places there. And you'll find some great. So I love Dante, New York, Troquet. It's great bar scenes. And then London, Paris, and Tokyo is another great cocktail city. They're all doing it. So before we sign, this covers everything. You can pop me a note, on Facebook. This isn't a YouTube video. I can't say subscribe to my channel. I don't do this for a living. So this is just to, this is a tribute to my friends. All of you have been fantastic with me over the years, and it's my opportunity to give something back. And plus, I got 4 fantastic cocktails. So, Zach, what do we have for questions?
Question from John Ward asking about Mezcal White Negronis. Are you familiar with them at all?
Mezcal White Negronis from John Ward. And John Ward, he may be coy, but he made one of the more interesting Negronis that he posted on Facebook. He's using some funky stuff out of France. So I have not done, and I'm a big fan of Mezcal. I have not done Negroni with it. And now he's got me thinking, how would I counter the smokiness of it? Would I go more toward dry on the vermouth side or sweet? I would possibly take the Mezcal with a sweet white vermouth. And what would I do for a bitter? I think the Campari may fight. Suze is going to be a little bit too weird. I may actually, and we didn't talk about it today, I would possibly cut it with an Amaro. You know, maybe, actually, I got one. Look, I'm totally riffing this. I'll try it after the call, but, you know, if I can do it. And Amaro is usually, we talked about Campari and some of the red peppers being aperitifs before dinner. Amaro's historically an after dinner digestif, but John, I may do, I would possibly do a riff on a Mezcal Negroni with an Amaro and a white sweet. I'll give it a shot tonight. Other questions, Zach?
Mike Stoner's asking about glassware. I know you guys get a lot of your stuff in Japan, but he says, do you have glassware recommendation for rocks glass, for the fancy beakers?
Yeah, so the question was about finding great glassware. This is I'm a big fan of Schott Weitzel, and that's what this is here. I tend to lean toward classic wines, and I got acquainted with them with wine glasses. We broke a lot of wine glasses at the house, and don't read into it. It's certain high-end wine glasses, if you even look at it, they'll break. So with Schott Weitzel, we ended up they're made with some titanium, and they're incredibly strong. They're incredibly clear. And that's what I lean toward. Laura will turn around and say, well, she wants something a little bit fancier. Other examples of rock glasses. This is out of France, and this one is out of Italy. For mixing glasses, you can go online. So this one is standard domestic, not too expensive. Probably, I would say, maybe $20. This one comes out of, this was picked up at a cocktail store in Tokyo. Pretty high-end glass. It's got the etching. It's more fancy. By the way, these can all go in the dishwasher. This is probably about $50. So again, a good resource online is going to be Cocktail Kingdom. They've got some great stuff. I think they've got the best Hawthorne strainer out there. And then again, if you're local here in Boston, you can hit the Boston Shaker store in Somerville. New York's got cocktail stores, and especially, I know a lot of people are buying online these days, but once everything opens back up, what I love about the local cocktail stores is they're usually staffed by bartenders. And so you're not just going in there, and I know the one in Somerville, they have about 60 bitters on display that you can taste, and it's a great way to learn things. And as you explore your cocktail, I should say expand your cocktail repertoire. What you can then do is talk to people, check things out, make mistakes. If you're gonna you may end up making a crappy cocktail, put it down, drink. Don't feel you have to drink it, but just get a sense of how the flavors play off. There's also some good books out there. Robin Simonson's a great writer. He's got some stuff and some sites online. Punch is fantastic. I think it's punchdrink.com. They do a terrific job. Liquor.com has some great stuff, and then there's some other sub-sites. Any other questions, Zach, that we have to do? So that'll do it for tonight. All right, so I want to say big thanks. Hopefully, again, my objective was to take your mind off of things for a while. And this is a way. A lot of us, we haven't had, I think people who know us, we tend to have a lot of parties at this house, and we haven't been having parties. So this is our way of giving back. So Zach, you want to hit the stop live. So get any questions, anything that you didn't want to ask, by all means, turn around and pop me a note. And I want to say thank you, and let's get through this together. Take care.